any documented cases of somebody laying in front of a train.
People do it, but
you freak out, right? You have your last minute of you're just primal whatever, we're going to escape this.
I just think it would be a really ugly way to go.
That commit suicide via train usually jump in front of it.
They don't just lay down.
Yeah. Because when you're laying down, your natural inclination is to think about things. So it's very suspicious.
Yeah, jumping in front of a train. Suicide by train is very common in places like Japan. But in places like Louisiana, guns are pretty plentiful. It'd be a lot easier and quicker to grab a 12 gauge and stick it in your mouth.
Or the bayou. I mean, you just run out to one of those canals.
Feed yourself to the fishes. Yeah, you can do all,
a lot of ways to do it.
Definitely better, quicker, easier ways than laying down on the tracks.
So, okay, I think, are we all in agreement that we've kind of laid out, as a skeleton overview, the case?
Yeah, do we want to just quickly mention that a couple of the 8 were interviewed about murders that happened previous to their murders?
That's actually probably a very good thing.
So Kristen Lopez, who there's a lot of connections. She seems to be one of the big, more connected of the
she's
8.
kind of a hot spot.
Yeah, she was interviewed about the Lynn Lewis murder, which was the first body that they found. Mm-hmm. And then, I guess, just not so long after she was interviewed, she was murdered. Mm-hmm. And then Brown, who was the 5th person to be found, was interviewed about the Patterson murder, which was the second murder, or the second body to have been found. Mm-hmm. Again, we don't totally know when the murders happened. Mm-hmm. We know when they were found. Mm-hmm. So she was interviewed about that. And then, if you kind of add the Bird Dog and Russell potential murders in with that, I guess that'd be about 4 people who were interviewed or said something about the case.
Well, and I think this accompanies. I think that Ethan talked about this.
Ethan does talk about this, and it's much clearer.
It's much clearer, but they
to lay a foundation.
All knew each other. Were all wrapped up in it.
And it's also been posited. It's also been said that they were all informants for the local police.
And thank you, Joe, because that's right where I was going, is that these ladies were all supposedly informants. I think the clearest case, I believe it was Nicole Guillory. Mm-hmm. She had a pretty serious rap sheet. And she had a lot of things on her rap sheet, but the DA decided not to follow it. And Joe, do you remember the phrase for when you're an informant and they don't want to follow through because you're an informant?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't remember the phrase.
I don't remember. There's a phrase, it's a Latin phrase, but essentially what it means is that we don't want to follow through because you're our informant, and we don't want to get you out of the field because then we're not getting information out of you anymore. Yeah. And all these women had things like that against them, where cops just like, oh no, we don't want to pursue that case. So you beat that guy with an axe handle. Well, that's okay. Yeah. That John deserved it. We don't want to follow that case. Yeah, literally cases like that.
So one of the things that I suspect with these, if they were all informing to the local police, and it appears that Jennings actually had really kind of a crime syndicate. There's kind of a mafia there, and they probably had at least one mole inside the police department, which means that if you're informing on members of the crime syndicate, then the mole gets the information back to the crime syndicate. That would be possibly a factor in your getting murdered somewhere later on down the line. Yeah, I feel all of these women were informing, and I'm sure there was a mole, at least one corrupt cop inside who was passing information along to the criminals. Mm-hmm.
I a little bit feel like we should talk about a lot of this police stuff that we're talking about are recent revelations based around Ethan Brown's investigation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that a little bit we should say, for a long time people thought that there was just a really crazy serial killer on the loose in Jennings.
Another one of them wacky serial
that it was
killers.
One person who was killing a lot of people, and it's still, it's still totally plausible that it's just one person, but that person, was on a killing spree from 2005 to 2009 and moved away. I've seen a lot of stuff in my research, just looking through threads on Reddit or looking at other kind of internet investigation places where people kind of talk, on forums. And a lot of people say, oh yeah, the Jennings cases, the Jennings 8 are connected to this serial killer that they apprehended in California 2 years later. And it was just like that this person was passing through there. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very...
He was passing through and just decided to stick around for about 4 years and murder people. And then...
Well, I think it's important to mention that for a really long time, that was the assumption, including the task force's assumption.
That's their primary focus.
That there's just a crazy serial killer killing prostitutes in Jennings.
Which is not an outrageous assumption, really.
I agree with that.
Yeah, it's not. But it might not necessarily be the case. There might be multiple murders. I know that Frankie Richard accused one of the local cops of being responsible for the murders, because, and I can't remember the cop's name, and I don't want to repeat it because I don't want to slander anybody who's dead. Right. But this guy apparently was a little bit kinky and known to frequent the prostitutes of Jennings. And when
he liked the ladies,
he did. And when he died, the murders stopped. Now, Frankie Richard claims that it was probably him, but at the same time, Ethan Brown, for example, doesn't place a lot of credibility in that. He believes that that cop possibly is involved in one of the murders, but not all of them.
Yeah. So I just think it's really important to talk about the fact that until Brown published his article, really, in terms of the coverage that this was getting nationwide,
it was always a serial killer.
It's just a serial killer.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a very good point to make, and thank you. I
think
totally missed that. I totally forgot to bring that up, so that's perfect.
I think, while we're kind of talking about all this police corruption, but that police corruption didn't really come to light until, I guess, when did the article come out? It was in 2010, 2011. No, later than that.
No. Ethan's article came out relatively recently.
I'm sorry. I'm getting my dates.
Yeah.
And by the way, I know I mentioned his book earlier, but he's still, since writing that article, has been still on the case. Talked to a lot more people, and says that he's uncovered a lot more stuff.
Yeah.
So and unfortunately, coming out. Yeah.
So what we're going to do, I think, at this point, it's a good time to bring in our interview. So we were lucky enough, like I said before, to talk to Ethan. There's a couple of things. So I know Devin, ironically enough, couldn't be here because she was in court.
And
she was actually...
luckily, she got off. She got a good lawyer. And,
I was on a jury. I was deciding someone's fate.
So Devin wasn't able to join us, but Joe and I did talk to him.
And I have reviewed the interview.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things that I want to say, which is, Ethan, we do bounce around a little bit, and we tried to take it in order, but this case is such a tangled mess that it may feel like we're jumping around, and that's not intentional. We're just following threads. That's why we try to lay everything out. Yeah,
because it's already, even just in this last, 30 minutes that we've been trying to describe
however long we've been talking about it.
It's a mess. You can tell already.
Absolutely.
It's a mess, and it's by the way, I believe that these murders are never going to be solved.
Yeah. The other thing I will tell you is, usually we get really lucky when we're recording an interview. Unfortunately, our phone connection on this interview wasn't the best. And that's going to happen. There's just nothing we can do to control that. So there are times that the audio is a little rough. So bear with us as the interview plays out. Sometimes it gets a little funny. That's what happens when you record a phone call. But with that having been said, let's go ahead and let's talk to Ethan, and then we'll talk some more about the case.
All right.
Okay.
So to start off with, what I was kind of hoping is, because this story's pretty convoluted is the best description that I can come up with. I was hoping you could kind of walk us through the story a little bit, just to help kind of illustrate it for our listeners.
Sure. I'll walk you through the bare bones version of it first.
Perfect.
So from 2005 to 2009, the bodies of 8 female prostitutes were found in swamps and kind of abandoned roads and wooded areas of a town called Jennings, which is the parish seat of Jefferson Davis Parish in Louisiana. In Louisiana, what we have is parishes, not counties. So in other states, you would have, like I'm from Maryland, you would have Montgomery County, for example, right?
Right.
So in Louisiana, you have parishes. So Jennings is the parish seat of Jefferson Davis Parish. And Jefferson Davis Parish is a tiny parish in the very, very far west corner of Louisiana.
Would that be like by
It's
Texas?
only about exactly. It's very close to Texas. And the population is only about 30,000 for the entire parish. And the population of Jennings is about 10,000, so it's even smaller.
Yeah.
So, again, what's that?
Oh, I was just say I took a little street tour on Google Street View yesterday, and it's not a bad looking little town. But I noticed there was nobody out and about. It was like you see cars driving. I only saw one human being on the sidewalk. It was kind of scary.
Right. It's a very, very small town, and what's interesting about it is that it's a very divided town. The north side of Jennings has things like the library, the courthouse, a few car dealerships, sort of typical small town stuff, right?
Yeah.
The south side, which is actually divided by railroad tracks, the cliche across the tracks.
It usually is true.
It's completely true here. South side, conversely, is abandoned homes, trailer parks, very, very small single-family homes, and things like that. So it's quite different than the north side.
Oh, is it kind of a racially segregated town? I mean, is it like blacks and whites?
No, it's not, and that's also what's interesting. It's segregated by class. Southside Jennings is actually African American and white. And when you talk to folks, I have a book deal to write a book about this case. I've been doing a lot more investigations since the article came out. And you hear phrases used by Southside residents to talk about the North Side, like high class, highfalutin, and things like that. So it's a class divide. It's not a race divide.
Uh-huh.
Southside Jennings is very racially mixed, actually. So you have these two separate sides of the town. And Southside Jennings is where all of these women who were killed were from. So the very bare bones sketch of this story is that from 2005 to 2009, 8 female prostitutes, all from the south side of Jennings, were killed, and their bodies were dumped either in canals, on kind of dirt roads, or in wooded areas in and around Jennings. So, and it's important to note, obviously, that every single one of those murders is unsolved. At one time, very briefly, charges were brought in one of the cases, the case of a woman named Kristen Gary Lopez, who was murdered in 2007, and charges were brought against the very notorious pimp on the south side, named Frankie Richard, but those charges were very quickly dropped. So all of the homicides are unsolved.
The charges against Richard, those are based on, what's her name? Is it Tracy Chasson?
Tracy Chasson, yes. Tracy Chasson is very interesting. She's the cousin of the first victim, whose name is Loretta Chasson. And she was, for a very long time, a prostitute working for Richard the pimp. And the reason, it's not entirely clear why the charges against Richard were dropped, but it appears to be that she provided inconsistent statements to police regarding that homicide.
Yeah, now she originally told the police that she had witnessed Richard and Hannah Connor murder Kristen Lopez next to a canal. Is that correct? Yeah. And,
that's correct. And Hannah Connor is kind of a god niece of Frankie Richard, who is also very close with all of the murdered women.
Yeah, and so was it Tracy? Is it Chasson?
That's all. Yeah.
Okay, Tracy Chasson. Now, she was the source. Was she the source also of the accusation about the pickup truck?
No, she was not.
Okay.
In 2007, and I wrote about this a bit in my piece, a detective with the Jennings police named Jesse Ewing interviewed 2 female inmates who provided statements to him in which they talked about Hannah Connor confessing her involvement in at least one of the homicides, and I think perhaps 2 as well. And the inmates also said that Connor confessed to them that Frankie Richard worked with actually the chief criminal investigator of the Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Office, a guy named Warren Gary, to dispose of DNA evidence in the Kristen Gary Lopez homicide.
Yeah, but she supposedly was murdered by the banks of the canal where she was found, correct?
That's according to the Chasson statement. It's not clear that that's correct.
Yeah, I see. It's a complicated little town. It seems like everybody was informing on everybody.
It's a very complex town, but the more time I spend there, the more I realize that it's a town that's very much doomed by its geography, meaning that Jennings is literally, like, if you're driving on I-10, and it's a big highway that connects Houston to New Orleans, if you're driving on I-10, it's like a driveway kind of off I-10. It's literally on the highway. And I-10 in that area is a major, major drug trafficking route. And the amount of drugs coming through Jennings and around Jennings is staggering. And it's cocaine, it's crack, prescription pills, everything. So Jennings is really, really at kind of the heart of the drug trade in that area. And I've actually, since my piece has run, I've actually talked to people who were in the drug game for a long time in Jennings, and they would tell me stories about, everybody in Jennings knows that, like, when you're growing up there, that the way to get money and the easiest way to get money is to make these little drug runs to Houston for cocaine or prescription pills and bring them back to Jennings. And it's very easy to do. It's very available, and it's very lucrative. So Jennings is this tiny town that has this tiny town setting, as I'm sure you saw, like, from some of the images that you looked at online. You look at the downtown, and there's the post office and the library and the courthouse, and it looks like a small town that could be anywhere, but yet it's really kind of a bullseye area as far as the drug trade is concerned.
That's a shame. This is sort of a side question, which is, while you were there doing your investigation, did you pack heat?
No, I did not.
I would have.
Yeah, I get asked a lot of people threaten me, or, did I bring gun with me and whatnot when I go out there. And actually, interestingly, as I was doing this piece, this has completely changed since the piece came out, but prior to the piece coming out, I was sort of looked at as as a kind of, they're like, oh, well, there's this strange person, coming to town a lot, not from here. No one pays attention to what's going on here. Isn't it sort of interesting that this guy is coming here? It was sort of, I was actually treated quite well by everybody that I saw for this piece, including law enforcement, because they had no idea what to make of me. And I think also, just as importantly, this case had been covered quite a bit in the media. CNN covered it, the New York Times covered it, and everybody covered it from the same perspective, which was, there's a crazed serial killer loose in the swamps of southwest Louisiana, and that's it. And I think they just expected me to do that piece that everybody else had done. And, they were quite surprised when that was not the piece that that I did, and very unhappy about that too. So
They were unhappy about it?
Oh yeah, I mean, the people in Jennings overwhelmingly, and I've heard from a lot of people, overwhelmingly were very happy about it. The DA's office, the sheriff's office, the police department were extremely unhappy about it.
I bet.
Yeah, extremely. Yeah. So since the piece has come out, I've had to radically